State Bank of Vietnam lowers deposit and short-term lending interest rates. Prospects of Vietnam-India trade relations. Hello and welcome to another edition of Bizline here on VTV International. I am Minh Hằng from Hanoi, and let's now take a look at the highlights from last week's economic scenes here in Vietnam. As part of his official visit to India, Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng attended the Vietnam-India Trade and Investment Forum on October 27. At the forum, the Prime Minister delivered a speech which aims at promoting commercial and investment links between Vietnam and India. India is keen on becoming a provider of raw materials for Vietnam in areas such as garments and textile and manufacturing, while looking at creating more favorable ways to welcome made-in-Vietnam products like consumer goods, electronics products and furniture. India is one of Vietnam's 10 largest trading partners. Two-way trade turnover touched $5.24 billion in 2013. Prime Minister Dũng visit concluded on October 29th. The Cabinet convened on October 29 to review the country's socio-economic development in the first 10 months of this year and discuss targets for the rest of the year. Reports at the meeting shows that the review period saw the lowest increase in the Consumer Price Index or CPI in 11 years, stable interest rates and foreign exchange market, positive changes in foreign direct investment and the effective disbursement of official development assistance and preferential loans. However, this period also saw difficulties in production and business operations, a high number of suspended businesses, low credit growth, and total retail sales. Regarding public debt, Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng suggested cabinet members should clarify the two key issues: the effective use of loans and repayment capability coupled with realizing public debt control targets in the years to come. The goal is to lower the bad debt ratios to 3% in 2015. The EU-ASEAN Business Council officially announced its constitutions as an independent body on October 27 at a press conference in Singapore. This marked a key milestone in Europe's commercial relationship with ASEAN, especially when the ASEAN Economic Community is established in 2015. 8 European chambers of commerce based in ASEAN countries, including Vietnam, will operate as part of the Council. The newly launched EU-ASEAN Business Council in Singapore aims to foster dialogue between European businesses and ASEAN member countries, provide two-way knowledge transfer, and contribute to the policy-making process. Currently, the EU is the second largest investor in ASEAN countries. EU companies have invested $75 billion in the regions over the past 2 years. There are currently 10,000 European enterprises in ASEAN. The State Bank of Vietnam announced that starting on October 29, the interest rate ceilings in Vietnamese dong would be lowered from 6% to 5.5% per year for short-term deposits from 1 to 6 months long. In addition, the SBV will also cut short-term lending interest rate in Vietnamese dong from 8% to 7% per year. The US dollar deposit rates will be slashed from 1% to 0.75% per year. The latest interest rate cuts applied since March 2014 contributed to extricating difficulties for productions and businesses, controlling inflation and stabilizing the monetary market. For the rest of the year, the SBV would not adjust other interest rates such as the rediscount, refinancings, and overnight rates. The SBV also called on commercial banks to cut lending interest rates for prioritized fields and keep medium and long-term interest rates at less than 10% per year. The Asian Oceania Computing Industries Organization, or ASOCIO ICT Summit, kicked off in Hanoi on October 29. Over 700 delegates also participated in this year's summit, with nearly 200 international guests from 20 countries in the region. The summit is an opportunity for policymakers, experts, and business leaders to seek effective measures to promote Vietnam's IT sector. Vietnam hopes that the IT sector will contribute to boosting socio-economic development, especially in agricultural restructuring. The summit is the biggest and the most important annual IT event in the Asia-Oceania region. This is the second time the summit has taken place in Vietnam after the first one in 2003. Those are several highlights from last week's economic scenes. Up next, we will talk more about the trade relations between Vietnam and India in our crosstalk. Bilateral relations between India and Vietnam has been on the upswing in recent times, with a number of high-profile visits over the past few months. Just earlier this week, Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng successfully paid a visit to India at the invitations of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with a goal to further strengthen trade and investment relations. With a total trade turnover has reached $4.26 billion over the first 10 months of this year, trade relations are considered one of the most highlighted aspects in cooperation between Vietnam and India. On these occasions, we had an exclusive discussions with Mr. Srinivas Gotru, Deputy Chief of Missions at the Embassies of India in Vietnam, to talk about the achievements in trade relations between the two countries, as well as the promising prospects in the upcoming years.
India and Vietnam has had a centuries-long relation and become strategic partners in 2007. Since then, India-Vietnam relations have been strengthened as reflected in several high-level visits by leaders from both sides. Bilateral trade turnover increased an average of 16% each year since 2009. For the first 10 months of this year, bilateral trade turnover already reached $4.26 billion, up almost 20% compared to the same period last year. India is among the top 10 trading partners of Vietnam. Meanwhile, Vietnam continues to be an attractive investment destination for Indian companies. According to the Indian Business Chamber, as of the end of this year, India will have 93 projects in Vietnam with 200 businesses in operation and a total registered capital of nearly $1 billion. Both sides agreed that these figures do not match their cooperative potential, and therefore the leaders of the two countries have set a target of $15 billion in trade turnover by 2020.
Thank you very much for joining this interview with Vietnam Television.
Thank you.
Back in September, Indian President visited Vietnam, and also just this week, Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng paid a visit to India. So what do these frequent visits say about the relations between India and Vietnam?
I think the frequency of high-level exchanges has gone up tremendously over the last few years. I think it's very significant in itself that we are meeting not just bilaterally in each other countries, but also on the sidelines of major summits, regional and multilateral fora that is happening. So as far as we are concerned, I think it's a great thing. It keeps the momentum rolling. It's only because of the high-level visits that we are able to achieve a lot more than what is happening, than what we would be able to achieve otherwise. And it also gives a great sort of a stage to highlight the achievements in bilateral relations.
How did the two leaders evaluate the achievements in terms of trade and investment between the two countries?
If you look at the joint statement that was issued on 28th of October, one of the things that we have listed is that both sides will pursue economic cooperation as a strategic objective. Economic and trade cooperation has been, as you know, an important pillar of our strategic partnership when we first decided to establish it in 2007. Over the last 7 years, there's been tremendous growth in bilateral trade and investment relations. And now we've decided during this visit that we will pursue it as a strategic objective. There are some announcements specifically which were done. The first agreement of an Indian company's participation in the highway sector in Vietnam. This was signed at the Business Forum on 27th of October in presence of the Prime Minister. I think this is the first Indian investment coming into the highway sector in Vietnam, and therefore it's very significant. We've had more agreements between the state-owned oil and gas company in India and also Petro Vietnam on this side. 2 agreements were signed. I think one of the agreements also looks at Vietnam's participation in offshore oil exploration, oil and gas exploration in India. So it's a two-way sort of a thing that is starting now. That is also very significant. And I think one of the things that we managed to achieve is the trade target that we had for 2015 has been achieved 1 year ahead of time. So, in fact, 2 years ahead of time, 2013-14, our trade crossed $8 billion, and we had a target of $7 billion by 2015.
So what are some of the main discussions during these meetings that would help to further increase the trade and investment between the two countries?
Few things have happened in the last couple of years. I think bilaterally we have set up a joint subcommission on trade, which is at the Vice Minister level. So this is a body which is it's a dialogue framework which was established recently to try and discuss ways and means on how we can push trade even further. So I think their next meeting is being scheduled in Hanoi early next year. So they will be getting into details on what are the ways and means, what are the policy changes that both sides needs to look at to push trade. The other thing that happened during the visit this week was that both Prime Ministers also listed various sectors which are priority sectors for cooperation in future. Now these sectors are basically energy, including oil and gas, power generation, infrastructure, textiles, agro-processing, chemicals, information technology, and so on. We've also offered to discuss additional concessional credit lines to Vietnam to help Vietnam diversify its economic profile and its trade and economic linkages. In December, we are holding a conclave, a business conclave in New Delhi, which is being held by our Apex Chamber of Commerce, the Confederation of Indian Industry. It's called the CLMV Conclave. And what happens is that we invite government leaders and business leaders from Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. This is specifically meant for these 4 countries to come to India and look at business-to-business collaboration, government-to-business collaboration, public-private partnership projects, and things like that. So leading up from now to in the next 6 to 8 months, I think there'll be a lot of follow-up activity on the decisions taken by both Prime Ministers.
After the highly successful official visits to Vietnam by Indian President Pranab Mukherjee earlier this September and Indian Minister of External Affairs Sushma Swaraj in August, Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng visited India from October the 27th to the 29th, which was again hailed as a resounding success. With the outcomes of those recent official visits in mind, both governments have chosen to drive forward their strategic partnership.
Hai bên, chúng tôi nhất trí sẽ làm sâu sắc hơn quan hệ đối tác chiến lược và tăng cường hợp tác trên tất cả các lĩnh vực. Tăng cường hợp tác thực chất trên các lĩnh vực khoa học kỹ thuật, văn hóa giáo dục, kết nối về hàng không và hàng hải, du lịch và giao lưu nhân dân. Ấn Độ tiếp tục hợp tác với Việt Nam, thăm dò khai thác dầu khí tại vùng đặc quyền kinh tế và thềm lục địa của Việt Nam ở Biển Đông.
At the India-Vietnam Trade and Investment Forum, Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng shared his commitment in creating favorable conditions for Indian businesses to increase trade cooperation for mutual benefits in areas where both sides have strengths, such as oil and gas, energy, infrastructure, IT, and agricultural processing.
During this visit of Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng, he also brought with him many big corporations to India to attend the India Business Forum. So what were some of the highlighted topics in discussions among Indian investors?
You know, we had the Vietnam-India Trade and Investment Forum on the 27th of October in Delhi. The agreement on the Indian companies' investment in the road sector was signed at that forum. They also made an announcement of the direct flights which Jet Airways would be starting from 5th of November. I think that is in itself is a very significant thing because it's going to really boost our tourism traffic, help our tourism sector in both countries, and also make it much easier for business travelers to travel both ways. We also had during the visit the State Bank of Vietnam granting a license to Bank of India to open branch offices here. This is the first time that Bank of India has been given a permit to open a full-fledged branch office. So we are hoping that with that there is going to be, really going to have a great impact on our trade and commercial relations.
In terms of FDI, which sectors in Vietnam are attracting Indian investors the most?
As of now, I think the big investments have been in agro-processing, minerals, some amount of food processing I think has happened. Energy sector, oil and gas has been very important. As you know, Indian state-owned company has been in the oil and gas sector since the 1980s actually. It was one of the first foreign companies to come into Vietnam. And now recently, I think last year, Vietnamese government has also awarded a $1.8 billion thermal power project to Tata Power in southern Vietnam in Sóc Trăng province. So this is also likely to come up in the next few years. I think there is also some interest in wind power potential in Vietnam. We're also looking at some airports, possibly power distribution as well, if that is found to be feasible. But certainly a lot of interest that's come in the infrastructure sector.
What are some of the sectors that Indian enterprises would like to expand more in Vietnam in the coming time?
I think India is very famous for cotton fabric and cotton yarn. But because given our geographical distance between India and Vietnam, I think there are certain disadvantages that you need to work with, like longer timelines, for instance. Also because right now there are no direct shipping links. So most of the trade that happens between India and Vietnam really comes through third country ports. It's transshipped through third country ports. So we're trying to see how we can rectify that as well. We signed a maritime shipping agreement, I think last year sometime. We are looking at ways on how we can improve that as well. So coming back to textile, I think there are certain things that we need to factor in when we look at more cooperation in the textile sector. But as you know, India is also a textile powerhouse in the sense that we manufacture quite a bit of yarn and fabric and textiles, ready-made garments and garment sector. But a lot of it is for domestic consumption. And that is because India itself is a huge market. So I think there is a lot of scope for Vietnamese manufacturers also to set up plants in India to manufacture for the domestic market in India, and vice versa. There is scope for some of the big manufacturers in India to come and set up a workshop or a manufacturing plant here in Vietnam to cater not just to Vietnam but also to the rest of the ASEAN countries.
Harish Toparia has been working in Vietnam for more than 8 years, as well as being the chairman of Indian Business Chamber in Hanoi. Harish also runs a marble supply business and has invested nearly $20 million in the country to date. For Harish, local employees play a crucial role in his company's performance.
I appreciate their working. You see, we are working here. We see really sincerity in the employees. They are excellent. Whatever work we give, they do the job meticulously and very nicely.
Meanwhile, Shantanu Srivastava has been working in Vietnam for 25 years. His company has invested in 15 hydropower projects throughout Vietnam. However, he still hopes for greater information exchanges between the business communities of both India and Vietnam.
I feel that the kind of opportunities there are in Vietnam, Indian companies have not really made use of that. So there are opportunities in renewable energy, like hydropower, small hydropower, solar power, wind power, and even infrastructure. There is a lot of opportunity in Vietnam to invest.
Harish and Shantanu are just two of thousands of Indian investors that could benefit
on the improving business environment in Vietnam. The governments of both sides are confident that more opportunities will arise through further cooperation.
2010 thì giữa các nước ASEAN và Ấn Độ đã ký kết cái hiệp định thương mại tự do trong lĩnh vực hàng hóa, và vừa qua thì các nước ASEAN và Ấn Độ cũng đã ký kết cái hiệp định thương mại tự do trong lĩnh vực dịch vụ và đầu tư. Những cái văn bản này thì sẽ mở ra cái cơ hội hợp tác rất lớn giữa các nước ASEAN, trong đó có Việt Nam với Ấn Độ, và đặc biệt là sau năm 2015 khi mà cộng đồng ASEAN được hình thành thì chắc chắn là cái quan hệ hợp tác giữa các nước ASEAN nói chung, trong đó có Việt Nam với Ấn Độ thì sẽ phát triển hơn nữa.
According to statistics, India has invested more than $260 million in 2014 alone and ranks as the 12th biggest foreign investor in Vietnam.
In terms of business environment, what are some of the favorable and challenging conditions for Indian investors in Vietnam?
Vietnam is a really dynamic economy in this part of Asia, and it's been growing very strongly for the last several years now. I think the workforce is educated, it's efficient, there's high labor productivity here. So there are certain inherent strengths in the Vietnamese economy which for most Indian investors are very favorable when they look at Vietnam. As I said, with the now with Vietnam also being part of TPP and other FTAs with other countries, I think soon you will see investors looking at Vietnam also as a base for manufacturing, for for expanding into third markets. It's already happening. Like for instance, a lot of smartphones are manufactured in Vietnam for third countries, and in fact there's a huge amount of smartphones which go to India from Vietnam. The challenges, the biggest challenge I think is lack of information and communication. I think because of the language differences, I think there is not enough information about what's happening in Vietnam back in India, and vice versa. Businessmen also are constrained by language, and I think there's some subtle differences in the way they do business, so it takes a little bit of adjustment when they come to Vietnam and operate, and I'm sure it'll be the same for Vietnamese businessmen when they go. One of the challenges, specifically when you say challenge, is that they also have difficulty in understanding what is the regulatory framework here. So sometimes the complaint that they do come back to us and give us feedback is that the regulatory framework keeps changing, once maybe perhaps a little too frequently for them to keep pace with and understand. I think by and large, despite whatever little challenges that they do have, most of them have been here for at least 10 years now, 10, 20 years or more. So they are quite happy with the business that they're doing. They're looking at expanding their businesses in Vietnam. So I think that they have a really positive sort of image of doing business in Vietnam.
With a goal to increase bilateral trade turnover to $15 billion by 2020, what are some of the measures and solutions that have been discussed and implemented by both countries to realize this goal?
If you look at last few years, the big things that have happened, one was, if you go back to 2009, that was the year when India granted market economy status to Vietnam. I think that has been useful. If you look 2010, India and ASEAN signed the FTA in goods, which also has had a sort of a positive effect on our bilateral trade. This year we concluded the FTA in services and investment. Last year, as I said, we also set up a dialogue framework on a joint subcommission on trade, which specifically addresses what are the problems that people on both sides are having and how we can address them. So what we in the embassy try to do is try and get information about India to as far and wide as possible. Every year we do several business seminars specifically targeting the sector and trying and getting business people related to that sector so that we can disperse information to all of them. Apart from these, we also have these export promotion councils, sector specific councils which look at a very particular sector for enhancing cooperation, be it trade or investment. So these are all different ways and means that we try to see how we can promote bilateral trade. But some of the events that I've listed, I think those have really helped in promoting our economic cooperation. Last year, as I said, trade was growing at 30%, and we don't really, this year I think it's growing at the same pace. So if it continues to grow at this rate, we're going to reach our next target of $15 billion even much before 2020. And I'm quite confident that that's going to happen.
So Vietnam is currently negotiating a lot of agreement, TPP, FTA between European Union and Vietnam, and also India and ASEAN, which Vietnam is a member, also signed an FTA. So, with all that global integrations evidence, what do you think about the prospect of India and Vietnam trade relation going forward?
Going forward, I think one of the negotiations in which both India and Vietnam figure is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. This is the original 10 members of ASEAN plus 6, India included. So this is going to be a huge economic space, really. And most of the members, ASEAN has FTAs, individual FTAs with most of the member countries. But the RCEP, as we call it, is going to cover the entire region, and it's going to be hopefully at a higher standard than what exists right now. I think this is going to create sort of an economic grouping with a lot of potential. The other big thing that's happening for Vietnam is, of course, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and once that comes through, I think several things are going to happen in terms of market access for Vietnam. And certainly, I think from a foreign investors' point of view, that is going to create a lot more opportunities to avail of the inherent strengths of the Vietnamese economy to start trading with the other countries in that grouping. Global economy right now, the outlook has improved. There's certainly a lot more optimism on how the economy is going to do, that we are beyond the crisis. The financial crisis is more or less receded. I think most of the countries are coming back with a positive outlook. Like Vietnam, India has also been doing better in its GDP numbers this year, and we're looking at higher GDP growth rates in the years to come. So I think as the economies rise, as long as our economies are doing well, the region is doing well, I think there's tremendous scope for using the strengths of each other for a mutually beneficial sort of a partnership. And I think that is what you will see happening in the years to come.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. In addition to the centuries-old cultural and religious ties, trade cooperation is strengthening relations between the two countries as well as bringing mutual benefits for both. In the time of globalization, India and Vietnam are proud strategic partners, and with a number of trade agreements signed between the two countries recently, business enterprises from both sides are expected to take full advantages of more opportunities to further develop both countries' economies. And that wraps up our Bizline this week. For more information and rewatch of our programs, do log on to vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. Thank you very much for tuning in from our team here in Hanoi. Until next time.